The good people of Americus, Georgia, have to search far and wide for its brushes with notable American figures. Booker T. Washington spoke there in 1908. Shoeless Joe Jackson, a great baseball player, best known for his lifetime ban from the game for helping fix the 1919 World Series, managed a team in Americus shortly after that ban went into effect. Dr. Martin Luther King spent a couple of days in the Americus jail in 1961 after being arrested during a civil rights protest in nearby Albany. And then there are the Randolphs. Janet Randolph and her husband Scott made their home in Americus. In May of 2001, however, Miss Randolph took their son to live with her family in Canada. For reasons that are unclear from the record, she returned to Americus 2 months later to resume her marriage in the family home. Soon thereafter, a domestic dispute resulted in Scott Randolph scooping up their son and departing the house. Janet called the police. Several officers came to the house, including Sergeant Murray, to take a report. Janet told the officers that her husband had a terrible cocaine habit that caused a great deal of domestic and financial harm. She also told them Scott fled earlier that day with their son. Within minutes of the officers' arrival, Scott returned to the home, but he did not have his son with him. When questioned, Scott told the officers he feared his wife would once again take his son out of the country, so he left the boy with a neighbor. When quizzed about his alleged cocaine use, Scott claimed the only cocaine user in the house was Janet. All of that notwithstanding, Sergeant Murray and Janet Randolph headed for the neighbor's house to retrieve her son. All the while, she complained that her husband was the real villain and that she would prove it when they returned to the home. Once there, Sergeant Murray asked Scott Randolph if he could clear this matter up and let the officers take a look inside the home for cocaine or other controlled substances. Mr. Randolph flatly stated no. The sergeant turned to Janet Randolph and repeated his request. She gladly gave him permission to intrude into the family home and, in fact, took him upstairs to show him evidence of her husband's criminal activity. The sergeant found several drinking straws with what appeared to be cocaine residue on them. Keeping one in his hand, he went to his patrol car to obtain an evidence bag. Just to be on the safe side, Sergeant Murray called the district attorney's office. The prosecuting attorney told him to stop his search and to come down to the courthouse to apply for a search warrant. When Sergeant Murray returned to the front of the home, Janet Randolph had a change of heart and withdrew her consent to continue the search of the home. Sergeant Murray wrapped up the one drinking straw he still possessed, arrested both Randolphs, and transported them to the police station. Based on the drinking straw and his observations, he obtained a search warrant, returned to the Randolphs' home, and conducted a much more thorough search. He discovered more evidence of wrongdoing, and eventually, Scott Randolph was indicted for possession of cocaine. Mr. Randolph thought the initial warrantless intrusion by Sergeant Murray was unfair. Here he was, a man standing on his own front porch, telling an agent of the government that it had no business in his home, his castle. That should have been enough to keep the power of the government away from him and his family. It was only through the luck of the circumstance that his wife was standing there, offering access to the same government agent he denied. The Supreme Court was sympathetic to Scott Randolph's situation. Justice Souter held in this somewhat limited circumstance, Sergeant Murray's accepted invitation into the Randolphs' home was unreasonable. Justice Souter believed that when someone is present and has a right to complain about the government's intrusion, that objection must be respected. Scott Randolph's presence and stated objection to Sergeant Murray's request to enter his home effectively barred the officer from obtaining anyone else's valid consent to do so. The core factor in this decision is that the objecting party was present to affirm his objection. If Scott Randolph were not at home on that date, Sergeant Murray would have had all the legal reason needed to obtain a valid consent to enter the home. Janet Randolph's unchallenged consent would have been sufficient. It was Scott Randolph's objection and presence that precluded Sergeant Murray from obtaining consensual entry into the Randolph home on that date. And the story of the Fourth Amendment continued on. I'm Ariana Rodini, and this has been a FLETC Talk.